Hello, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the most shocking news stories of the moment. The protests in Los Angeles and the militarization of the city by order of President Donald Trump. Yes, tensions have risen, and significantly, in the United States. It all started a few days ago, when a large operation by the Federal Immigration Agency, ICE, arrested dozens of immigrants in Latino neighborhoods in Los Angeles. According to reports, the agents acted violently, breaking into homes, stopping cars on the streets, and even approaching people in markets and churches. The result? An explosion of protests. Thousands of people took to the streets to denounce what they call an immigration witch hunt. Protesters accuse the Trump administration of using federal force as a means of intimidation and repression against vulnerable communities, especially Latinos and Asians. The demonstrations began peacefully, with posters, chants, and speeches, but soon escalated. On the second day, Waymo self-driving cars were set on fire, shop windows were broken, and barricades were erected on central avenues. And that's when President Trump decided to act, or rather react. In an extremely controversial move, he ordered 2,000 National Guard members and 700 active duty Marines to be sent to the city of Los Angeles. This was done without the consent of California Governor Gavin Newsom. Yes, you heard right. The president sent military troops to an American city without the request and against the will of the state government. Governor Newsom called the action an abuse of power and immediately announced that California is filing a lawsuit against the federal government, claiming that the decision violates state sovereignty and sets a dangerous precedent for American democracy. The question that hangs in the air is, are we witnessing an authoritarian takeover in the United States? Meanwhile, the images coming out of Los Angeles are intense. Troops are patrolling entire neighborhoods. There are light tanks on avenues, and helicopters are flying over residential communities. Several universities have suspended in-person classes, and more than 120 people have been arrested. One detail that stands out: the protests are not just about immigration. There are banners calling for freedom of the press, civil rights, and even Trump's impeachment. In other words, the dissatisfaction goes beyond ICE arrests. It reveals a much deeper institutional and moral crisis. And how are people reacting? Well, there are those who support Trump's decision, especially in more conservative regions of the country. They argue that the law must be enforced and that the demonstrations have gotten out of control. On the other hand, lawyers, politicians, and activists are alarmed by what they call the militarization of civilian life. For them, sending troops without state authorization is a step towards centralizing power, and this dangerously echoes the practices of authoritarian regimes. It is worth remembering that the United States has faced similar moments in the past, such as during the civil rights protests in the 1960s, and more recently after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. But now, what sets this moment apart is the level of military involvement and the open friction between the federal and state governments. What might happen next? Experts predict that if the protests continue and the government's response remains aggressive, there is a risk of institutional confrontation between the federal executive branch and the states led by Democrats, and that, in an election year, could further inflame political polarization in the country. We close this bulletin with a question for you. In your opinion, is President Trump acting to protect order, or is he trampling on democracy? Leave your comment below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for daily updates on the world's top news stories. See you in the next video.